It's the International Soccer Preview. We are Soccer Files Canada. Welcome to Series 25, looking at the players of Euro 2024. This episode is looking at the players of Denmark. Here we go. Hello and welcome again to the International Soccer Preview by Soccer Files Canada. I'm Kevin, and we continue Series 25 on the groups and players of the 2024 Euro Cup. This episode covers Denmark's players. It's actually part 2 at the Players Mediacast, and here we look at the selections. In part 1, we made a list of the candidates and introduced them and their likelihood of making the squad. And there is a link to that in the show notes. This episode will be divided into 2 sections. In section 1, we look over the list we compiled in part 1 to see who made it and who didn't. And in section 2, we summarize surprises in the selections, very few for Denmark here, and we review injuries. Let's begin then, and we will just kind of add to the introduction a note on their preliminary squad. So on May 30th, they released just a straight 26-man final roster, so no preliminary squad for Denmark, and you can see by the steadiness of the selection that they really didn't need to. They pretty much knew the players they had. Okay, let's go and begin with Kasper Schulman, the manager, and we'll consider him a successful selection since he didn't lose his job coming up to the Cup. And on we go to goalkeepers, where we had 2 likely candidates. The first was Kasper Schmeichel, who was selected, and also Frederick Rono, who also was selected. We had likely candidate Mads Hermansson, also selected for the squad, so very much as expected there. And the possible candidate and all those below him, Andreas Hansen, not selected for the squad. We won't talk about players who were seemingly off the squad or retired here. On to central defence, and we had 2 definite candidates in Joachim Andersen and Andreas Christiansen, both of those selected for the squad. And among the likely candidates, Simon Kjær, the captain of the team, was selected, and so was the Jannik Vestergaard, also selected here. And then we have Victor Nelson, who actually was selected for the squad, but then very quietly, I really had to dig to find this information, very quietly replaced. So we're actually going to change his highlight to purple here. I use that in my notes to indicate someone who was selected but then replaced. So Victor Nelson, we'll talk about it a bit more at the end. I also want to point out that in the warm-up games, Simon Kjær, the captain, didn't start. We remember he was injured in the first game of the World Cup and didn't start, and I'm really wondering what's going on here. They went with a 3-man defense, and it was our 2 definite candidates, Joachim Andersen and Andreas Christensen, along with Vestergaard, and it was that in both of the games. So Simon Kjær not showing up there, so I wonder if he's struggling with injury once again. Okay, and he was replaced with Matthias Jorgensen. So I use a yellow highlight to indicate someone who has come in to replace someone. Matthias Jorgensen was our candidate who we had as seemingly off the squad, and he hadn't appeared for their last 8 matches. So after the 2022 World Cup, he was on the bench for 2 and started 1 game, and then not selected for 9 games, including the last 8 matches, but recalled here to replace Victor Nelson, which was done very quietly, as I'll come back to. Okay, on we go to the left side, and we have Joachim Mæhle, as a definite candidate, and he was selected. And Victor Christensen, a likely candidate, also selected. And each of them started one of the warm-up games. We saw that Christensen seemed to be challenging Mela's starting position there. We'll have to see how that goes in the Cup, but one of each of them starting the warm-up games. At right back, we have Rasmus Christensen and Alexander. He was a likely candidate, and he was selected. Alexander Barra, the first of four possible candidates, was selected despite an injury doubt about him, and we'll come back to that in section 2. But anyway, Alexander Barr selected, but our second possible candidate, Jens Stryker Larsen, not selected, and nor were the other two candidates, Elias Gellert and Mads Roerslev. None of those were selected, but teams usually just bring two left backs and right backs to the tournament. Interestingly, in the warm-up games, it was Alexander Baugh starting both of those, so also maybe challenging for the starting position there. Okay, on to the midfield, and we'll look at defensive midfielders. We had no definite candidates, but a likely candidate in Morten Hjulmand, and he was selected for the squad. Also, a possible candidate, Christian Norgard, also selected. In the central midfield, though, we did have two definite candidates. That's Pierre-Emil Højbjerg and Christian Eriksen, both of those selected. And we also had a possible candidate in Matt O'Reilly. He was not selected. In the central midfield, in the first warm-up game, it was Norgard and Højbjerg starting, and in the second, Højbjerg and Hjulmand. So it looks like Højbjerg is the most likely starter among them there. Over to left midfield, we had Matthias Jensen as a definite candidate, and he was selected. And Thomas Delaney, a possible candidate, despite being a veteran of tournaments, and he is selected for the squad, Thomas Delaney. So both of our candidates in that category were selected. On the right side, right midfielders, we didn't have any candidates, so nothing to look at there. So we move on upfield to left attackers. And here we have only two possible candidates, Mikkel Damsgaard and Jacob Brun Larsen. He had a strong ending to his season. Both of those selected, Damsgaard and Brun Larsen. In the warm-up games, it was, well, they didn't actually use this position in the warm-up game. It was Mila as the we saw, I don't want to go too much into the details. So I'll just say it was Damsgaard in the second game playing as the left attacking midfielder there. So he's the only one who got the start. Over to the right attackers, we again here had no definite or likely candidates, but we had three possible candidates. The first of whom was Andreas Skov Olsen, and he was selected. And the second one too was selected, that is Anders Dreyer. However, the third one, Gustav Isaacson, was not selected, and nor was the possible but unlikely Robert Skov. And in the warm-up games there, again, the position wasn't used in the first warm-up game, and Andreas Skov Olsen was the starter in the second warm-up game. So a bit of an indication as to the starting lineup there. We move on to central attackers, and here we had, again, no definite or likely candidates, just a possible, and Jesper Lindstrom was not selected for the squad there. Okay, on to forwards, and we have quite a few candidates here. Beginning with Rasmus Højlund, he was selected for the squad. and Jonas Wind also selected, and he played as a left forward in the first of the warm-up games there. Yusuf Poulsen, the other likely candidate, was selected, and our possible candidate, Kasper Dolberg, also selected there. And so we waved goodbye to Martin Braithwaite and Andreas Cornelius, who had seemed to be off the squad. Anyway, in the warm-up game, so it was Wind and Hoyland playing as two forwards in a 3-4-1-2. Christian Eriksen being the attacking midfielder in the center there, and in the second game it was also 3-4, but the forward lines changed from 1-2 to 2-1. So Damsgaard and Skov Olsen, the attacking midfielders, and Rasmus Højlund as a lone centre forward there. All right, that brings us to the end, and we're going to, no, it doesn't. It brings us to section 2, and we're going to review the surprises, but honestly, very few for Denmark here. We have just one notable non-selection, Mohamed Daramy, the left winger. He was out with a knee injury and not expected back. We had ranked him as a likely candidate, but that was not taking the injury into account, and we knew that he would probably not make it for the Cup. So a mild surprise there, Mohamed Daramy out from injury. And then a surprise inclusion, Jacob Brun-Larsen, because we had him as a possible but unlikely candidate. So he was selected. And then Matthias or Jorgensen, sometimes known as Zanka, also a surprise there because he had seemed to be off the squad. And now I'll explain the situation there. So he was not initially selected, but brought in to replace Victor Nelson, who had picked up a muscle injury. Victor Nelson picked up this injury somewhere between the end of the season, because he played the last game of the season for his club, or at least he was not tagged. He might have been on the bench, but anyway, he was not coded as injured. But for the first warm-up game, he was coded as injured. So sometime between the end of the season and the first warm-up game, Victor Nelson picked up that injury. As far as it went on the squad, Victor Nelson was on the squad up until June 9th, I think, and then suddenly his name was replaced by Matthias Jorgensen. So I looked into it and I found virtually no mention of it anywhere until I found one article that did talk about it. And then when I researched it further, I did find out about Victor Nelson's injury. So Matthias Jorgensen basically brought in from out of the cold to replace him. But a surprise because he had been considered to be off the team there. For Denmark, no new players brought in that we were unaware of in part 1. So they do have some new players playing, but no players added to the list that we had made. Okay, let's look at injuries. And recovered from injuries is Alexander Baugh, and maybe he started both games to bring up his fitness level. He had been out with a muscle injury since early May with an unknown return date, and he had struggled with injury during the season, but Alexander Baugh apparently recovered there. Dropped due to injury, we saw Mohamed Daramy, who had been a likely candidate. And then we talked about Victor Nelson, also dropped due to injury and replaced with Matthias Jorgensen. And that is all for injuries for Denmark. So not too bad there. Baugh coming back, they'll be happy about that. That brings us to the end. We would like to thank Mike Kripak, Big Sound Music, and Pixabay for the wonderful background music called Dance 90s accompanying this mediacast.